Okay, well, hello and welcome to the third episode of Sabah el MeeM, the queer news and views show with your host, me, Alice Guthrie, and my guest today, Randa Jarrar, who's live and direct. Well, we are recording, but she's live right now, all the way from Los Angeles, California. Hi, Randa.
Yes. Hi. Good to
And
see you.
We're having you too. We're having a little bit of delay on the recording, so we're going to be interrupting each other and crashing into each other a bit, but that's okay. That's just the subatlantic cables doing their thing.
It's more than okay. I think it's also queer, time is not linear. So
That's true. That is true. Okay, so yeah, I'm really delighted that you could join me. We actually did an interview recently as part of a panel at the Edinburgh International Book Festival, but this is like just a one-on-one for a whole hour. So I'm really looking forward to getting deeper into some stuff. So I'm going to say what it is that I think you do, and you can correct me if I'm wrong. So you're a novelist. And you write memoir as well. So you write fiction and short stories and also memoir and lots of really great journalistic articles. But you're also teaching creative writing in the university since many years. And you are the director of the Organization for Arab American Writers, which is called RAWI, Radius of Arab American Writers, Inc. or something.
yes.
Yeah. So, and you're sort of a multifaceted, multi-talented. Oh yeah, because you're also acting. That's the other thing. So welcome, Randa.
Yeah.
Really great to have you with us.
Nice to be here. It's really fun. Yeah. I also have like a couple of other things that I do, but I'll just keep those to myself.
Oh, really? Are you sure? You're also a translator, aren't you? But I don't think that's maybe what you're referring to there.
I haven't done translation in a while because I decided that it was just draining as a writer to have to. I mean, there's positives and negatives to translating. I find I really enjoy that there's already a work of art, and all I'm doing is sort of trying to create a duplicate that's just as beautiful, and knowing that I can't. So it'll just be like maybe 95% as beautiful if I'm lucky.
Yeah.
But I love that I don't have to come up with structure, that I don't have to come up with characterization, that I don't have to none of that stuff. So in a way, translating is freeing, but in another way, I find it like super draining, so I've stopped doing it.
Right. Yeah, because I mean, and I'm a translator as well, right? Well, I mean, I am mainly a translator, I guess, or I have been, and I'm not a writer. I'm not a fiction writer. So yeah, I'm not a creative writer in my own right. But that thing that you describe is also for me one of the downsides, because the fact that you can't put in structure or characterization or something as a translator, sometimes can be annoying, I think, right? Maybe you haven't translated anything.
No, it really can be. And I think, early on I made mistakes like omitting a page that I thought was not necessary and getting a phone call from the writer saying, did you forget to translate this page? And me gently trying to say, oh no, but it was just a page where a character was moving around a room and it just seemed very clunky.
Yeah.
And then, I just had like not a very good response to that. So, and I don't blame the writer, because, a writer creates a world and has thought of everything and wants it to be the way it is. So,
yeah, but well, I mean, this is actually like a topic that is a whole kind of potential massive one, I think, because there's also that thing about it, whether or not the writers had any editorial input and any kind of support in that way. Like I think that in Arabic letters, in Arabic publishing, there's much less of a culture of people having people's feedback and people's input. Whether it's like a partner, an agent, or as well, a formal editorial process at the publisher or whatever. which is much more the norm. I mean, massive generalization, but I think it is much more the norm in kind of Anglophone letters, wouldn't you say?
So I mean, I think it's a little bit of both. I know writers who write in Arabic who undergo their own editorial process, sharing stuff with friends and beta readers and having stuff being edited that way.
Mm,
I've also, I used to hang out with publishers in Cairo, and they not only had an editorial input, they also had a sort of open house policy. So, like a place like Merit Publishing in Cairo, you could
mm,
always go in, you could always, have a Heineken or smoke a blunt. It was always available, and there was a conversation continuously between the
mm,
publisher and the writers. So I thought that was very cool compared to the US and the UK, where, in my experience, publishers can be um, uh, quite annoying and have a lot of input that maybe is not necessary.
mm.
So it would be great to strike a balance between those two.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
and I
yeah.
think, and I also think with Arabic, with writers who write in Arabic, there's another editorial process, which is the silent inner censor. So the person inside your mind who is saying, no, you can't actually write about this because we might go to jail, or hey, you shouldn't write about that because we might not be able to come home if you do that. So it's just like a different level of edits and editorial journeys.
Absolutely. Yeah, that is very, very true. But I guess I'm thinking slightly on a different level of more like the thing of when, nobody's noticed that the character walks into the room twice in a row, or that their hair turned from black to blonde, or something, kind of stuff that would get picked up just by like another cooperative pair of eyes that, not everybody's lucky enough to have a publisher like Merit, I guess. But I want to
True.
like but I want to get into asking you actually about something that's really fascinated me in reading your work. Actually, I wanted to say that yeah. So talking about you've got the book to come. I guess it's out in the new year, right? Love is the next
Yeah,
country.
February.
Yeah,
Yeah. It'll
February.
be out
Yeah.
in the US and the UK.
And so I was
Early
lucky enough
February.
to get the galley copy from you and read that, and I really really loved reading it, and I just really want to recommend it to anybody watching. It's an amazing memoir, and I found it massively engrossing, and it made me cry and it made me laugh um, quite a lot in different times, and then it also made me cry and laugh at the same time, which is quite rare. And I don't want to do a spoiler, but it was the armrest moment.
Oh yeah, yeah. Good. Okay, good.
Mm.
Yeah. I mean, there was a huge, so those who are not familiar with this particular essay, um, this is an essay that is a chapter in Love is the Next Country where I am denied entry into Palestine through the Ben Gurion airport,
And
and I am on
say,
my way
sorry,
home.
I need to just
What's
say
that?
we haven't. Sorry to cut you off with the transatlantic delay, but we need to just say that you are Palestinian Egyptian American. We haven't said that.
Okay, yeah. Yes, I am Palestinian Egyptian American. I'm centering myself literally and physically. Um,
Well
so
done.
yeah, and so on my way back, they put me back on the plane, back to the U.S. and I just really wanted in the writing of that to have the reader feel physically the sadness that I felt um, coming home from there, and using that armrest moment was my way of hoping that that pain would translate, so to speak.
Yeah, yeah. And I think that translating pain into a way that into a form that whereby it's accessible to people who haven't experienced that same pain is something that you do really well, and something that's really, really important in literature in general, right?
Thank you. Yes.
And so in your novel Map of Home, which is over 10 years old now, that's, it's a fictional novel, and it's a story of somebody whose life hasn't been that different to yours in some ways, right? And so I'm interested in where the kind of memoir and fiction interweaves or not for you, how that's worked. I was also wondering, because it was interesting reading the novel and knowing that it's like 10 or 12 years old, and then the memoir, which is just about to come out now, and wondering whether it was important for you to write fiction first and then move on to a memoir, or yeah, if you could talk to us a bit about that whole area.
Yeah, I think that with A Map of Home, I wanted to write a novel. I didn't want to write a memoir. I wanted to make my childhood and my family story into art. And I used the basics that describe me. So I had the character also be Palestinian Egyptian. I had the character also grow up in Kuwait. I had the character also move to Alexandria, Egypt, and then to America. But I didn't want it to be a straight memoir because there was so much more I wanted to say with that first book. And I also just had seen people like Proust, and other great, Western writers write these incredible books that were fictionalized versions of their lives. And I found them to be, um, received as art and not necessarily dismissed as memoir. So I think it was my way of dealing with a culture that thinks of women's memoir and women's stories as, I don't know, redundant or unnecessary or confessional.
Mm.
So yeah, for me, it was like creating that character was much more fun than just writing in the I first
Mm.
person as
Yeah,
myself.
it felt like you had fun. That fun came across, I think, in the novel, and but it earned you actually. I mean, talking of documenting pain and so on, it earned you some quite strong criticism from your father, as you document in the memoir, in Love Is the Next Country, that's about to come out. And so you tell of how your father said to you that by having written, I'm paraphrasing, but it's like having written so shamelessly about sex, you've kind of desecrated the legacy of your Palestinian family, or words to that effect, right? And
Yeah,
and he
it's
and even
hilarious.
and he even wanted you to burn your books, and that actually, gives rise to a kind of amazing section of the memoir where you kind of go off into this or you have this recurring fantasy about what it would take to burn all the copies of the book, because the book Map of Home has been pretty successful. It's been translated into loads of languages, and so you imagine like traveling around and tracking the copies down and so on. But I mean, to be serious about it, I thought something that I thought was so interesting about that was that I really felt that your the love and rage with which you engaged with those characters, and the intensity with which you painted their portraits, I thought that was a massive honouring of your Palestinian legacy. In all its complexity and in all the reality of family and conflict, that not only noble warriors and people that are kicked out of their land and all the rest of it, but also like fucked up characters and pain and violence and all the stuff that goes into a human life. Um, but it
Yeah,
wasn't.
thank you.
But it wasn't seen as that really by certain members of your family, right?
I mean, so yeah, like for me, the reason it's funny um, is because of the hypocrisy. I think that male writers write about sexuality all the time. Arab male writers,
Mm.
and they're canonized for it. Like Nazar al-Qabani, who I personally don't think is a very good poet, is seen as like this god, right? And then literally Adonis, a Syrian poet, has the balls to call himself Adonis, even though he's not that hot. So, I mean, I think that the cool thing about, um,
Mm.
like, what I love about being Arab, what I love about being Palestinian and Egyptian, what I love about being African and Asian, is that there are these beautifully boastful traditions that everyone has been able to claim, and maybe my dad didn't, enjoy reading about a father character who is an asshole, but
Mm.
that's just a personal problem. That's not a literary criticism. So, um, yeah, that's how I dealt with it, was just like knowing that it was just him, his sexism that kept him from seeing those parts of the novel that are honoring of my background and our
Mm.
background.
Yeah, yeah. And so to go back to the kind of memoir fiction thing, not to create a binary on a queer show, but like your you talked about how come you wanted to create this fictional version of yourself in a way, but then you did come to write a memoir. So how is that to do with the passage of time and things having changed in your life, or was it a form that you felt would allow you to do different things than fiction?
Yeah, I thought it would allow me to do different things, and I also felt that it would allow me to talk about abuse in a way that was very straightforward. So
Mm.
I actually have written a couple of novels that are, on my hard drive, that were just novels that I needed to write, to explore the violence that I underwent, especially as a single mother, at 18. And those novels didn't really work out. And I think it's because I needed to actually talk about the events themselves as, um, as nonfiction for sure. But there's something, I really thought that I would be more honest if I could write them as fiction. But when I did, it turned out that I wasn't as honest.
Mm.
I like to try new forms. So my second book is a collection of stories because I love that form, and I wanted to tackle the memoir form because I found myself not able to really write more than a page or two of nonfiction at the time. And so I just thought that was a challenge, and I was like, challenge accepted. I need to be able to conquer this form. Um, so I think that was a big part of it. And also, yeah, I'm not, I was 22 when I started A Map of Home. And um, without sharing my age, it's been a minute. So I find that I'm a lot more ready to approach the topics that I, was approaching in A Map of Home from a more critical perspective and as a cultural critic.
Yeah.
So I think, yeah, I think it's a combination of all the things you're saying.
Mm. Yeah, I think that really comes across actually. I mean, it's a cliche to talk about, and it's very linear to talk about, being a more mature writer or a more mature person. But there is something of what you described that comes clearly across. Yeah, and that form of doing memoir with kind of in quite staccato sections with intersections of more kind of um, more overtly political and more personal kind of interweaving in that way, I guess is something that it would be. Yeah, I don't think you could quite do that in fiction in the same way, really. Um, and yeah,
Yeah,
and
also, like, in terms of queerness, sorry. Yeah, in terms of queerness, I think I just really wanted to write a book that literally said memoir, and attach, sexual experiences, memories, and queerness to it, because I find that it's very important to have, work out there that reflects the lived experiences of Palestinian and Egyptian queers.
Yeah.
So I think in a novel, with A Map of Home, my character was openly bisexual. There were so many scenes where, she struggles with her attraction to all genders. Um, but that didn't necessarily put her sexuality or that queerness in the foreground the way that I wanted. And with Love is the Next Country, I'm just so explicit with my sexuality and with the kink and BDSM communities that I'm a part of. And that was really important to me because I think that I live in a culture that is very anti-sex, that is anti-consent, and like living in the U.S. around all of that toxicity makes me want to stake a claim and say, no, like this is actually ours. Our sexuality is ours. It doesn't belong to our government. It doesn't belong to men, heteronormative, cisgendered men who want to claim our bodies.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, I mean, I think it would be safe to say that the global culture is anti-consent, right? I can't. Can you think of anywhere that's like embodying? I mean, anywhere geographically in which it's all about consent. I mean, yeah, there's communities and
yeah, well, and that's another thing about writing memoir. I'm able to focus on my own experiences.
mm,
Um, so for me, as someone who's like lived in so many different places and traveled around the world, the only places where I was sexually assaulted as an adult were in the US.
yeah,
So I think the US has, like, what I want to do is address the US's um, rape problem. There's definitely a
mm,
rape problem here. There's a
yeah,
rape problem everywhere. Yeah, we
yeah,
can say that. But at the same
yeah,
time, like, I want to focus on a country that has claimed that it is
absolutely.
helping Muslim women by,
Mm,
invading their lands and messing up their lives,
mm,
and meanwhile on its own soil, women are oppressed, raped,
mm,
told that they're lying or not taken
mm.
seriously, etc. So yeah, it's definitely a
Yeah,
political choice.
absolutely. And that construct of that binary of free liberated West versus oppress women oppressing East, or all of that bullshit, I mean, goes back such a long way. And I know that here in the UK, there was a massive connection between the anti suffragette movement, so the movement against giving women the vote here, um, was some of the colonial leaders and rulers of Egypt at the time were really involved in that. So this whole discourse about like having to get the women to not wear the veil, and whilst at home suppressing women's fight for the vote, and that binary, the construct of that binary was very, very useful to furthering um, the patriarchy's aims here. So we're still trying to un unravel that, aren't we, in the present day? And it's still very present, I guess. But I wanted to go back to your stuff about kink, because something that comes across so powerfully in your memoir and other articles and work that you've done is really your faith in conscious kink and consent as a kind of place of healing and liberation for traumatized people and people of color, especially. So it'd be great to hear a bit about that.
Yeah, I mean, I think that consensual kink can be super liberating. I think that also as a storyteller, thinking of scenes is really interesting. Talking about scenes with partners, um, you know, uh, physically coming up with how a scene can be, positive for everyone involved, and also deliver in terms of fantasy. Yeah, all of that is so liberating to me and so creative. It feels like another, um, art form. It feels like novel writing or story writing. It feels like directing, film directing, and it's all just um, electric because it's human beings and their desires, right? Kind of vibrating together in this one space. And it's actually the thing I miss the most during quarantine is being able to have play parties and go to kink events. And, a lot of times kink and sex are equated, but they don't necessarily have to be. You know, you don't have to have sex with someone that you're playing in a scene with. I mean, you can. Obviously, it's all about consent and deciding whether or not you want to do that. But I really enjoy it. I like it a lot better than going to the gym.
And I guess the idea of consent as really an antidote to that whole rape culture, right? I mean, that's part of what's so liberating is that it's all about actual consent and working out, what consent really means, which in documented history hasn't really. We don't think that we know that that's really happened in any other moment of history. I don't think really. I mean. The sexual revolution of the 60s around contraception, for example, was really important, but it wasn't about consent as such.
Yeah, we're having, we're evolving, I think, as living beings to think about ways that we have the ability to communicate consent, unlike other living creatures, right? Like we can actually, say I don't want this or I do want this, and it's on the other person to listen. So for me, consent isn't just about giving or enthusiastically giving, but receiving and figuring out a way to make that reception feel really like an honor. Like this is an honor when someone consents to you playing with them or doing a kink scene with them. They're trusting you so much, and so you need to access your higher self and make it so that that person's trust is, cared for, carried, honored.
Yeah. So in that case, really, what you're describing is a sacred act and a sacred space, which is so interesting to think that, because I mean, as I understand it, the language around consent comes from queer communities. Like it's a queering of sex, really, to really get into the nitty gritty of how consent happens and what's needed for what consent really means, I guess. And so it's so fascinating to me that there's this kind of, given that queer sexuality and queer gender stuff has been labeled as sacrilegious by so many traditions and so on, right? And like seen as we're all going to go to hell or whatever. But actually what's happening is that within aspects of queer culture, we are reclaiming and we are fashioning or something the sacredness of sex, right? I mean, that's quite profound, isn't it?
Absolutely. It's beautiful. It's so beautiful. Yes.
Cool.
And we're modeling it. I mean, the thing about queer communities is we constantly model for other communities and more, whatever, like normie communities, how to be, really. And I think that, the ways that we reject gender binaries or, honor consent or whatever it is, shows the larger culture, what we can look like, how we can evolve as a people away from these sorts of really flat and like what I think of as unnatural sorts of
Mm,
social constructs and boundaries. So,
mm. Yeah, absolutely. But it's just really interesting to me, this tension between kind of, because unnatural sex, for example, in the Lebanese penal code, that is what same sex orientation, whatever you would call it, activity is labeled as, right? It's actually having unnatural sex is the name of that crime, for example, in their penal code, right? And so it's kind of like this crazy, fascinating tension between how stuff's being labeled and what stuff actually is. And I think that although it's complicated, the kind of moment of to a certain extent, mainstreaming of commercial aspects of queerness, there is also great cause for hope, as you say, in the idea that queer communities can model certain ways of being for other communities. God, that's the first kind of positive.
absolutely.
That's the first positive kind of global thing I've thought for several days. I'm just gonna enjoy that for a moment.
Yeah, absolutely. It's worth it.
um, yeah, I really wanted to ask you a bit about your kind of because you're an Arab American and you're involved in this organization for Arab American writers. And I read something that you'd written, I guess it was like 10 years ago. I think it was in 2011, and you'd kind of said you were describing how over the previous decade, from 2001, Arab American writing had come from under the radar up to on the surface or something like that. And there'd been this sort of great change in terms of visibility and Arab American literature that you could actually do a search on in the library and something would come up and so on. And so I wondered how do you see what's happened in the last 10 years since that? Has it carried on exponentially, or has it plateaued, or
Yeah, I
complicated?
mean, I think it's just it's changed so much, and it's a lot of it. I think in America specifically is about publishers really, deciding to finally give Arab American writers chances. I mean, I remember when my book was going around a map of home to editors, they had just acquired Towelhead by Alicia Arian. And, like people would say things like, oh, we just acquired a book very similar. When it really isn't similar, it's also about Arab American characters. So I
We've
just
got our
felt,
Arab American book for the decade, thanks. We'll
yeah,
take that kind of thing. Yeah.
yeah. Whereas, like, for example, this April, I don't know, something like maybe 8 books by Arab Americans were published just in April. So
Mm.
I think that, yeah, it's becoming much more, um, I don't want to say acceptable, but that's kind of what comes up. Uh, like publishers are more willing to take a chance on Arab American writers, it seems. But it's still not anywhere near where I think where it needs to be. I think that, uh, there's still a problem in publishing with supporting the ingenue writer, who is viewed as an ingenue writer. So just basically supporting debut books and then not really, um, you know, going to bat for writers who've been around for 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5 books.
Mm.
Whereas a white writer, very mediocre, I can name so many, keep getting chances. They just,
Yeah.
their 4th book tanks, they still get a 5th book deal, there's stuff like that. Um, it's really frustrating and infuriating.
Mm.
Uh, but also, I mean, and I've also seen young Arab Americans kind of not know that there are all these books out there. They'll be like, "Oh, are there any Arab American writers?" And it's very heartbreaking because even with all the work that we're doing in a literary organization, um, where we're trying to collect all of our names so that people can know like where to go for every American fiction and poetry and nonfiction, there's still kind of like a "where are we?"
Mm.
question.
Mm. Yeah. And so it'd be nice if that changed.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I guess it can take a long time for things to filter through. You know, we within the scene can know, and I mean like the literary scene really, rather than like queer scene or something right now. Like, you know, you can kind of we have this granular grip on what's being published and who's translating what and so on, but kind of out in the wider world, it can take a long time for that stuff to filter through. Is there
Yeah,
much?
yeah,
You know, I
absolutely.
mean, is there kind of media attention to Arab American creativity? Is there a concept of it out in?
I think that just seeing, you know, for me, seeing a show like Rami on Hulu get critical engagement and
And,
acclaim as
and what
a
was that?
serious show. It's a show called Rami, and it's on Hulu, and it just gets a lot of critical engagement, and is taken seriously as a show about Arab American young people and their family. Uh, that's kind of amazing. It's been almost 20 years since 9/11, and we finally have a show like this, you know?
Mm,
Um, so I think that I'm hoping that that means that there's an opening for more, uh, Arab American stories in the foreground. But I also know that, Americans have a lot of work to do still, um, to right a lot of the wrongs against the Black community and the Native community here. So,
yeah.
um, and it's really difficult to talk about stuff like this with some Arab American writers, specifically men, who think, oh, but why do we have to queue up? Why do we have to stand in line for equality? And it's like, no, actually, it's not us standing in line for equality. It's us. We have to understand that if Black people and Native people in this country don't have their full rights and aren't treated as human beings, then no one will, right? Like nobody's gonna get treated that way. So,
Mhm.
um, yeah, I am in a lot of ways interested in seeing this all in the big picture rather than coming at it with a victim point of view or
Mm,
perspective.
mm. Yeah, that makes sense. Um, I mean, talking about race and the big picture, I'd quite like to touch on or get into something that is might be for some people what you're known for. I don't know to what extent. I know that if one Googles you, when one finds a lot of stuff about this saga that happened when you called out the Bush dynasty on their racism and their war crimes, and you got loads and loads of shit for it, and you weren't allowed to make that statement, as it were, you know. And this became a kind of a big old incident, and you had like a really horrible time. It seems actually at the hands of trolls and everything. And I just wanted to talk to you a
I
bit
yeah, I yeah, we could talk about that. It's I've gone through so much therapy and I've been able to write about it and get a lot of distance about it. I am gonna hit this really quick if we are gonna talk about this.
sure. Good to know that you've got your tools at hand.
Yeah,
And there we go. A true Californian modeling what it is to have
it is
legal
legal
marriage.
here to smoke cannabis.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, it was just a really strange, but now looking back, I mean, that's obviously what happened. I think that most Americans, from what I can tell, don't want to think critically about race, and they don't want to think critically about people who have been in power. And um, when someone who embodies all of these identities that are so demonized, right? So a fat queer woman who dresses quote unquote eccentrically. I don't think I dress eccentrically. I think I just have really sexy fashion style. But that's just not. How dare they? Right?
No, how dare you? I said.
Oh, yeah, how dare I? Yeah, absolutely.
That's what I meant. That's what I meant.
Yeah. And so, like, most people who have my intersection, and I'm Muslim, and I'm proudly Muslim, and I'm proudly queer Muslim. So I get shit from everyone, not just from white racist Americans. So yeah, so I just
exploding at that list of intersections, right? I mean,
yeah, it's so. I mean, I think I know that time period was really difficult, but I'm also really glad that I got to see exactly how awful some people can be and where people are in the culture in terms of being able to face the realities of what our empire has done to other people. So, and to us, like the way that most Americans are just regular people who are struggling and suffering. And, 1.5 million people died in Iraq. Why? Why did we allow that to happen? Why are we not talking about it? Why are we mourning the passing of a woman who got to live until 92?
Which would be Barbara Bush. In case anyone didn't get the reference. Yeah, I mean, I was wondering. Well, there's so much about this, but I mean, and obviously, I don't want to focus too much on the response of all the trolls and the violence of that. I mean, it speaks to beyond fragile, right? And also, yeah, there's so much that is sad about that for them as well as for you. And I watched some footage of you going back to work after that incident and having like a security detail and being like hounded. In fact, if anyone's interested in this, I'd really recommend to find the clip on YouTube where you're being verbally trolled by somebody, saying all the things that one would imagine someone saying, and you just keep talking to a kind of closer group of people, and you're talking about how the white farmer from Fresno bailed out Angela Davis. And like you managed to just kind of keep talking, and this, at least in the recording that I saw, the troll's voice is louder, but you keep going and you're audible, and that in itself is quite an amazing artwork actually, because it really speaks to that whole situation. But I wonder, I mean, this was a couple of years ago, wasn't it, in 2018? And not to say, now everything's fine because like hashtag Black Lives Matter, but I wonder whether you think it would be any different now to make a statement like that. Would you think you would have got more support and it would have been less?
No, I think that
you don't think even the university would have had to get with it more quickly, or in the context of
I don't think so, because I think that the guy who came and was yelling at me is a known Nazi in Fresno, neo-Nazi, and he has a following of Nazis, and yeah, that's just, I mean, that's not going away. There are people in America who actively hate and think, and so they hate people of color, they hate queers, and they hate queer people of color. So it's this insidious undercurrent, and it's not going anywhere, and I don't think it ever will. I think that with freedom, we have to continuously fight. But I think if I said it now, like Trump's brother died a few days ago, and I got a couple of tweets from people saying, what's your take on this? A couple of people with like MAGA and Make America Great Again in their like Twitter profile, being like, what do you have to say about this now, pal? And it's like, I don't have to say anything, because you're already thinking about what I would have to say about it, which means that that maybe something needs to be said about it. But there's another woman of color who's probably saying something, right, and like getting shat on for it every single day.
Absolutely. And I didn't actually mean, sorry if I wasn't clear, I didn't mean, do you think, hey, now it's 2 years later, no one would have done that? I more meant whether on the positive side that people would have got differently involved in a positive way or something like that. But yeah, I mean, that it's probably not so different. I just think that it's amazing, really, that it could be. It just speaks so badly to our global situation that it could be seen as such a scandal that somebody mentioned, that the regime is racist and has killed loads of people in Iraq. How can that be, scandalous? But there was a line that I really, really loved in your memoir, in Love Is the Next Country, where, well, it's at the end actually of the section where you're discussing that whole stuff, and you say, I write what I like. What does it say? I write what I like, I say what I like, and I fuck whomever I like. And you're not talking, ostensibly you're not talking about fucking in that moment. You're talking about the incident with the tweet and everything. But I really loved how you marry that all together. And it read to me as quite a queer manifesto, and that sort of the bringing together of sexual freedom and consent and the stuff that we were talking about with freedom of expression and being allowed or allowing oneself to speak out on these important issues. That seems to me like a thread that runs really strongly through your work, actually.
Thank you. Yeah, that's the hope. The hope is that, I'm constantly screaming at the top of my lungs that we exist and we deserve not only to exist, but to exist joyfully and loudly. And that is queerness, right? Like, because we exist so much, it's threatening. It tends to be threatening. Yeah.
Is that your sister coming in from her haircut?
Yeah, my sister.
Do we get to see your sister's haircut live on something?
I want them to do it. Do you want to get my nail cream? Yeah, you can take it out. She's getting a haircut. Do you want to do a little cameo for Sabah el MeeM? Hi, everybody.
You're not in shot. I didn't see you. You weren't in shot. That was too. You got a mask on. Oh my god. You're not in shot still.
Come closer.
Yeah.
I'm just here. Nice to meet you, composer, pianist.
You're a composer and pianist. Amazing.
She is, yes. She's amazing. You can follow her music under Phonodelica.
What's her name?
Phonodelica?
Phonodelica.
Phonodelica is the artist name, yes.
Okay, great.
She's amazing.
Okay, lovely. So we have this like thing that we do on Sabah el MeeM, where we have this queer idea. You bring one and I bring one. So how about we weave that in now? Are you up for that?
Sure. So what is the queer idea?
The queer idea can be any kind of idea, queer idea that you think is useful, empowering, liberating, that you would want to share, that you've found useful. It can be something intensely, complex, impressive bit of queer theory, or it can be, like get your vitamin D. I don't know. It can be whatever really that you think is a useful queer notion.
I'm really into vitamin D right now, actually. I've been doing once a week 50,000 whatevers of vitamin D, and it's like so great. Queer idea. I think just realizing lately that heterosexuality is a kink, that like just thinking of heteronormative. Oh wait, are you still there?
Still there. You've just gone single shot.
Okay.
When we get to queer idea, you have the whole screen.
Sorry.
To be massive with your queer idea. Oh, yeah, it's doing fine.
The queer idea is that heterosexuality is actually also should be considered strange, and that heteronormative sexual acts are kinky in a way, because I mean, they're so specific, especially if you think in terms of missionary position. It's such a strange thing that is considered the norm in terms of sex positions. Queer sex is so much more than the missionary position. Queer sex is joyful, it is creative, it is beautiful, and it centers everyone's pleasure, however that pleasure might look. So it doesn't focus on a money shot at the end. It doesn't focus on a linear journey that ends in orgasm or in a certain specific way that the culture says is the real ending to a sex act. So my queer idea is that queer sex is better.
In some.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Thank you, Randa. Okay,
Sure.
I'm going to do my queer idea now. Here I am in my full screen. So yeah, I wanted to just flag this thing of queer being a verb. So we can talk about queering something. And so it's a transitive verb? So it has an object, yeah. So you can queer something. And I think, especially at the moment when queer is to a certain extent having its moment, as evidenced really by this little series of ours that's going out on all the major channels. But yeah, there's a certain moment for the commercialization of queer and mainstreaming and so on. I think it's really, really important to remember that queer isn't really an identity. We are trying to escape the binary sort of in or out notions of you either are or you're not. And that really, when we queer stuff, we are resisting categorization, and crucially, we're resisting the normal. And so there's a queer theorist who was writing in the 90s called Michael Warner. Well, he might be still writing now, for all I know. And he talked about regimes of the normal, and that when we resist the regimes of the normal, we are queering our lives and queering the way that we work. And that queer is therefore something that we might be doing or not doing, rather than a permanent label that we can earn or bestow on other people. And yeah, that seems like an important thing for us all to remember before we get too caught up in all getting our badges that say we're queer or whatnot. So yeah, that's my queer idea. That's the formal bit of the show done. Oh yeah, rejecting normative ideals. That's what I said on my notes. I didn't look at my notes. Okay, so we still have a little. Have you gone muted, or did you just move your mouth without speaking?
Oh shit! Yeah, I was muted.
Oh, okay, you're back. I thought I saw something happening over there in LA.
I think I muted it. I muted it because I was just checking my email and I got an offer.
Oh really?
For an acting thing.
Yeah, huh?
I'm really good at multitasking. Ask any of my bottoms.
Okay. I will. I'll just call them now. What was the offer that you got? If it's
I can't say much, but it was just something about a TV show, and if I was available, and it was just really exciting. So I had to mute because I was just like, I was just too excited while you were talking, and I was listening.
Mabruk, that's very cool. Who knows what I'll find on my email when I check it after we finish.
You can totally check your email while we're talking. I will not be upset.
Actually, we were wanting, weren't we, before we got started, we were wanting to have this be like very, very informal so that I could continue painting my nails and get the other hand done.
Yeah, let's talk about our nails. Let's do a nail thing.
Yours are amazing. Yeah.
Yeah, I hired someone to do this.
It looks like it, yeah. Not being funny, but it doesn't look like you did it yourself. Okay, so listen, we only have a little bit of time left, and there's actually loads of other things that I wanted to talk to you about. But one thing that you already referred to just before, which I thought would be really nice to go back to, which I had in mind anyway, is you said that you're a proud queer, you identify as a queer Muslim, and that you're, you said something like that, didn't you? And I had picked up at work in a couple of places where you do some, well, I mean, there's some really interesting, creative, radical stuff that you do with Islam in your work throughout, I think. And one of the things that I really like that you do is to kind of, how can I put this, have a critical lens and an interrogative lens, but also to just bring into your, I especially noticed this in Map of Home in the novel, you're bringing in the sort of magical feeling of having a sacred faith. You know, you're bringing in the character's experience of what it feels like to have faith and be moved by a spiritual practice or a spiritual idea. Which I think is a really, really great nuance to have, rather than it being, all or nothing, kind of practicing or atheist. But you also speak about some feminizing Surat al-Samad, for example. And anyway, so can you talk a bit about this queer? What is this queer Muslim? What?
What is happening? Yeah, I mean, I just love. I mean, I love listening to Quran, and I love, you know, I found out, you know, I just keep learning about these queer Muslim imams and the kinds of amazing khutbahs that they give. For me, it's just really important to remain in touch with that sacred connection that we have to a divine being through language, through poetry, through sacred poetry. And because I spent my entire life thinking of God in a masculine form, because in Arabic, right, Allahu Akbar, it's not Allatu Akbar, it's not Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen, it's Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. And it's Ar-Rahman Ar-Rahim, not Ar-Rahmana Ar-Rahima. It's Lam Yalid wa Lam Yulad. It's not Lam Talid wa Lam Tulad. But Lam Talid wa Lam Tulad is so beautiful. And if we are told that Allah is not female nor male, that Allah is everything, then for me personally, when I'm at home, you know, I would never force anyone else to do this. And I do understand that the Quran is perfect the way it is, and that we're not supposed to change it. But for me, when I say Allahu Akbar and Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen, what I'm doing is I'm connecting to all the parts of Allah. You know, I've spent 40 years connecting with the masculine. Why not connect with the feminine? Why not connect with all parts of Allah? I also have a card deck that has every name of Allah and what that name represents. And to me, like, what's more queer than having a sort of like tarot deck type situation that also has Allah's names? So yeah, it's a constantly growing and forming identity and practice that I'm trying to figure out. And I'm
sounds great. And what's more queer than having a multitude of ways of manifesting, right? Like in the names of Allah, for anyone doesn't know, it's 99, isn't it? Is it 99?
Yes.
And they're all quality, like the Redeemer, the Nourisher. They're all sort of. I'm still trying to think to myself.
And if you feminize those names, so Al-Ghadban, you turn it into Al-Ghadbana, Al-Kareem, Al-Karima. All of a sudden, we have 198 names, not just 99 names. And so God, there's one God, but the multiplicity, the growing, it's kind of like with queerness and normies saying things like, there's so many labels for things all the time. Everything is labeled. Couldn't you just be a person?
Oh, it's an alphabet.
Yeah. Plus, that's how I say it. The poet recently, Jericho Brown, the poet, said that he pronounces LGBTQIA plus as Leviticus, which I think is also very funny and queer. So the multiplicity of labels or names for the one, I think, is just beautiful, because why not name things? Why not, put a name, and so that we can summon it and say it and honor it and lift it up.
And summoning it, exactly. Yeah. How wonderful. And have you has that taken some developing for you then over your lifetime? You said you've found queer imams doing khutbah. I didn't know about that, really. Where are they?
There's queer imams. If you go on Twitter and you look up queer Islam, there was a thread that I started a few weeks ago where I just asked who has a queer imam and who are some queer leaders that we can talk to. And so many people responded. There's tons of people to look into. I don't want to name them, just in terms of to keep protected, but just in case. But it's just really beautiful to know that there's so much out there. I know that in Los Angeles there's a women's mosque. It doesn't belong in one place. It's a traveling kind of gathering. And it's beautiful. The last time I went, all the speakers were women, and we all prayed together. There was no separation in ranks, and you could come as you are. There was no dress code. It was just really beautiful. And the speakers, one spoke about surviving a shooting, and one spoke about the buraq, which is the feminine divine, which I have a tattoo of. I don't know if you can see it, but
on your hand. Oh, there on your arm. And the buraq is? Can you tell us?
Yeah, the buraq is. So the buraq is considered the feminine divine. It's the steed, the sacred steed that the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ rode from Saudi Arabia, from Mecca to Al-Quds, to Jerusalem in Palestine. And on his way there, he went up all seven heavens and then, ascended and descended. And the buraq represents many things, but that was the original mention. And the way she's described in the Quran is as a horse, but with a woman's face and a peacock's tail and wings. So it's this it's this queer character. It's the divine as multiplicitous and beautiful and many-sided, but with a feminine face. And to me as someone who can't go to Jerusalem, has tried twice and has been turned away, knowing that the Quran has a divine creature that will take me there in the blink of an eye is just such a beautiful idea.
Yeah, I'm not surprised you got a tattoo of it. How beautiful. We're going to have to end on that note. It's a really beautiful note to end on. There was loads more that I wanted to talk to you about, actually, especially one of the things I really wanted to get into was how your work kind of teaches us about migration and notions of transit. But, people will have to read your work in order to have that experience. And I heartily recommend that people search out your work.
Thank you so much.
And you're
it's
welcome.
Just been so fun to talk to you and to get a couple of opportunities to chat with you. So it's been really fun to get to know you and spend some time with you on these chats.
Yeah, likewise. And you've got a website, so we'll put that up. We'll get Aaron to put it up across the screen so people can look up You've got a really funky website where people can look at your stuff. And yeah, hopefully, inshallah, we'll be able to be doing things like this in person at some stage.
Inshallah, yeah, inshallah.
All right, cool. Well, thanks so much, Randa. Bye. And bye, everyone. Bye. Thanks for watching. Much love.
Dum dum